on going up, and they go right up to what was called the Old England property.
Yeah. When you say, for example, that the gold, or it didn't go to bedrock, what do you mean it didn't go to, did bedrock disappear, or what?
Bedrock in the ground between Baker Creek and the mouth of the creek, which was Soldier's Bar, was so deep. So deep.
Well, there's so much gravel from the surface down to bedrock.
150, 200 feet. We don't know. Nobody's ever tapped the bottom there.
Well, why don't they just dig? I mean, what's to stop them from just digging?
It's too difficult, because first of all, if you dig gold that deeply, Mike, if you dig for placer gold, you've got all sorts of problems with water.
Of course.
And, you know, you've got over 100 feet of overburden, and generally the thumb rule in placer mining is don't dig too much overburden, or you're going to go broke, and you're going to go broke in high style. And so this creek, you see, is a very interesting creek. So what happens in the 1860s, the creek is flooded with American miners. A lot of them go back to the States. They never have to work again. They have done extremely well in Rock Creek, and this is a creek that has two runs of gold. It has a lemon yellow gold on the high run, but when you get down into the very rich ground, Mike, it has a coppery gold.
We got a pan of gold here, as a matter of fact, and I was just going to grab it here because this is actually gold from that location, and you can actually see the, dump water on myself, you can actually see the different colors in here. There's a blonde kind of lemony gold, and there's a dark coppery color gold in there.
Yeah, there are two types of gold.
So that would lead you to believe that these are coming off two different deposits.
Two different time eras, you know. I mean, one is probably several thousand years ahead of the other, and definitely from two specific areas, undoubtedly.
How much gold do we have in this pan? This is taken from that.
A quarter of a pound almost exactly in that pan. Now, a quarter of a pound troy is 3 troy ounces, because 1 troy pound is 12 troy ounces, which is different than the standard ounce.
Now, I noticed that there's gold floating in this pan. Now, that's something which the surface tension is actually keeping some of these little flakes afloat.
Yeah, you find that gold will actually float out of the pan if you're not very careful. And so this is surface tension. You touch that gold, it'll disappear to the bottom, of course.
And there it goes.
There it is, you see.
All right.
And
so we got to Denver. Is that where we are?
We're at Denver Bar. But what happens is this, is that the Chinese hear about Rock Creek, and the Chinese, of course, are some of the great miners of British Columbia. They come into Rock Creek and they start gleaning the diggings that the whites have left behind. And, you know, they come into that old property up there, way up at the top of Rock Creek, that is the kind of the Old England, is referred to as the Old England. And that's a hard rock property, but just below it, the Chinese were working there for years. And I contacted one of the individuals from Brideville. Bridesville is fairly close by, and he said, you know, very interesting, Bill. He said, what happened there? He said, the first Chinese came in the 1860s. My grandfather provided them with all their food.
Yeah.
And he said, the first Chinese who came in, they lived high off the hog. They had beef and all the trimmings, and boy, they stayed there a couple of years and cleaned it up. Then another group of Chinese came in, about 10 or 15 years later. His grandfather was still supplying them. Yeah. And this time, they didn't have beef. It was a little tougher digging. They had chicken and the trimmings, in other words, vegetables.
Yeah.
And then another group came in about 10 years after that. Grandfather's still there. So this time, these guys had a tough time. They didn't have beef. They didn't have chicken. They only had some of the trimmings. So that it was tough ground by then. Three groups of Chinese had come in, and first group had done very, very well, judging from their habits. Second group had done relatively well. Third group was practically starved to death.
So whatever meager provisions they had, they probably cooked in an item just like this.
You bet.
Just a few veggies in the bottom. That would not keep me looking for gold.
Yeah, it was tough country, Mike. It was tough economically, and it was tough as far as law and order was concerned. You know, in that early Rock Creek in the 1860s, there were a number of murders, a lot of gunplay, and one significant murder where a miner was killed, an American miner, by an Indian. Now, there were some great Indians in that area, but, you know, one was Chief Tenasket, who was a noble Indian, but there were a few renegades, and this is one of them, and he killed this American miner and then went over the top heading for the Okanagan. Well, the American miners chased him over the top, caught him at Suyas Point, which is now Suyas, and they lynched him there. Well, this disturbed Governor Douglas. He'd been there for the Rock Creek Rebellion, and there's a murder, and he says, we're going to solve that. He starts the Dewdney Trail, which is eventually to go right from just outside of Fort Hope all the way through the Wild Horse. Interesting thing about the Dewdney Trail, Mike, it's just north of the border. It keeps that country British. He was a very far-sighted individual, really quite a fascinating character. And so we had that, you know, the 1860s era. then we get into the 1890s.
Rush is not over in 1860?
Not by a long shot.
All right. When we come back after this break, a look at rush number 2, or maybe rush number 4, considering all the rushes the Chinese had in the area. Back with more Gold Trails after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Talking about Rock Creek, it's salad days, I guess, 1860s, but interest
Sure.
did not end with the 60s. What brought them back?
Well, Mike, the depression of the early 1890s, which really began in 93. So some of the Chinese were still there, and this shot shows a few of the Chinese working in the lower stretches of Rock Creek. This is 1895, and they're hydraulicking, one of those banks which has a little bit of gold in it, but hydraulicking was the most efficient method of mining, so they managed to glean their, some earnings from this rather last of the attempts at Rock Creek by the Chinese. And the next shot is kind of interesting, too, because it shows some other activity in the area. And these are wagons coming into Rock Creek, which has changed slightly. And they're carrying equipment for the mines, and there's now a hard rock interest there as well. But, you know, it's interesting because it's still a violent camp, even by the turn of the century, because just after the turn of the century, an outfit came in, and interesting part about it was that there was a guy called Charlie Vedder in charge of this outfit. He was kind of the camp manager, and he had some backers. And the backers felt that they weren't getting enough gold. That was the rumor that still circulates in that old country down there. And so the miners took their lunch break, and Charlie Vedder goes into the building, which is still standing, by the way, Mike, still standing at Rock Creek. And after lunch, one of the miners wants to talk to Charlie Vedder. He walks into the building, and Charlie Vedder is sitting very calmly in a chair, but there's a little problem here. Charlie Vedder has a hole right between his eyes. And everyone swore they hadn't heard a shot. Well, there were no silencers in Rock Creek just after the turn of the century, so somebody put Charlie Vedder away, and probably because he was high-graded.
He was stealing from the rocker boxes or the sluice boxes or something. This little weapon reminds me it's an excellent component of this thing. What caliber is this?
That's probably a 32, and it's 1858. It was probably actually manufactured in 1860. This is the type of gun that the early American miners would have carried into the Rock Creek area.
It's not quite the buntline special that I've come to associate with sort of the American West. Very much more delicate, useful, not obtrusive.
That's right.
Efficient.
That's very, very beautiful gun, actually. And this was a fascinating area.
You think this maybe bumped off Charlie Vedder?
I don't know. Was that one or what bumped off Charlie Vedder? They never found the murderer, Mike. They never found the weapon, and all the evidence disappeared.
So Law and Order. Douglas.